Good morning, everybody. Good to see so many of you joining. So looking at the time, we'll get started. So firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Robert Chandler. I'm a clinical psychologist at the LightHouse Arabia. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be here with all of you today. We're going to be covering the topic of coping with COVID-19 anxiety. Before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So as I say, Dr. Robert, one of the psychologists at the Lighthouse. I work extensively with people here at the Lighthouse with the full range of mental health problems and have 15 years experience predominantly working with anxiety, depression, work-related burnout, and work with a good number of corporate clients. So as I say, really excited to be here today. We're going to go through the presentation. We're going to allow maybe 20 minutes or so for questions, comments towards the end. So yeah, maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. So I can see just in the time I've been talking, we've had a good few people join us. So for those of you that didn't catch it at the start, welcome. My name is Dr. Robert Chandler and look forward to being with you here today. Okay, well, I think then we should get started. So to begin with, oh, my slides aren't clicking on, just bear with me. Okay, there we go. So this is the LightHouse Arabia at a glance for those of you that aren't familiar with us. So we have a team of 30 mental health clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, OT and speech and language therapy. We serve the full range, adults, children across the lifespan. We're the only provider of what we call mental health first aid. We're the only provider in the UAE of this internationally recognised programme. We've got community at the absolute heart of what we do. We offer a range of free services, which includes our online free of charge support groups, and you can see our website for details of how to get involved with some of those. And we were born out of what we call the Rami Grief Centre, so we really are grief specialists here at the Lighthouse. So that's us at a glance. I've talked a little bit already about some of the services we offer, but you can see some of those services there. This is our marvellous group of clinicians here at the Lighthouse, a diverse bunch. Yeah, okay, good. So let's get on to thinking about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to think about understanding anxiety in the brain. And I think it's really important to understand what the sort of neurobiological underpinning of anxiety is, because only once we really understand that can we master anxiety, can we get on top of anxiety. We're not going to go too much into the science, but I think it's really useful to have some background understanding. And then next, we're going to think about ways that you can cope or confront COVID-19 anxiety. We are going to be focusing on COVID-19 anxiety, but anxiety is anxiety, right? So a lot of what we talk about today, in fact, all of what we talk about today is going to be relevant in terms of managing anxiety generally in your day-to-day lives. So those are the main objectives for today. So firstly then, let's get to understanding anxiety and the brain. So anxiety 101, we all have anxiety, okay? Even people that say they don't have anxiety, they don't worry, these people still have the ability to feel and perceive anxiety. And I'm yet to meet a single person who has never felt anxious at some point during their lives. It's in our wiring, okay? We wouldn't be here today if we didn't have anxiety. Anxiety has afforded us the opportunity, the evolutionary opportunity to still be here today. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. Anxiety is neither good nor bad, okay? And I really want you to start getting into this headspace, because often the assumption is that when anxiety shows up, this is a negative thing. This is something that we don't want to have. And of course, there is problematic anxiety. You can see on the bottom graphic there. Clinical anxiety is not helpful. Okay, but neither is the other end, no anxiety, okay? If we didn't have any anxiety, we would be running around high-fiving people in the supermarket during times of COVID. We would be, taking reckless actions in relation to our health. So having no anxiety is not a good thing either, but equally, having panic-like symptoms, clinical anxiety, which stops us from engaging in life, this is also unhelpful. So what we're looking for is somewhere in the middle, okay? Optimal anxiety, performing at your peak, okay? It's good that 5 minutes before coming on today, I started thinking, gosh, I've got a good number of people to present to today, maybe a few butterflies in the stomach. This is a good thing because this prepares me, okay? This tells me that I'm about to engage in something that matters. And so I need to be engaging at an optimal performance. And if you speak to or hear interviews with, top athletes, they will talk about the idea that there is an optimal level of anxiety in which to perform. So we still want some anxiety in our day-to-day lives to help us function, and so that we can take precautions when it comes to COVID, but not feel overwhelmed by the COVID pandemic, okay, so that we can keep it in perspective. And we're going to be talking a little bit today about practically how we go about doing that. I want to talk to you about how things work in your brain in terms of anxiety, okay? Now, you'll see here on the screen, right at the middle of the center, we have something called the amygdala, okay? So if you look at the left-hand graphic, you'll see the amygdala, okay? And this is a small sort of reptilian part of your brain. So we share this part of the brain with, crocodiles, dogs, cats, most living mammals, all living mammals, in fact, have a version of the amygdala, and this is what controls the fight-flight response, okay? It is an automatic response, okay? We cannot control whether it goes off or not, okay? We are going to talk about how to manage it once it has gone off, but we cannot control the fight-flight response going off, and this is really important for us to understand. So we perceive a danger in the environment, okay? So let's use a non-COVID example for the time being. So suppose I got bitten by a dog when I was younger, and I'm walking along the street and I see a dog, okay? My amygdala is going to fire, okay? And what it's going to do is it's going to send adrenaline and cortisol, okay, the main stress-inducing hormones. It's going to pump them through my body to prepare me for what we call either fight or flight. Should I stay and fight this dog? Probably not. Or should I run away from the dog? Okay. We talk about sometimes the idea of freeze as well, which is where we feel paralyzed or overwhelmed by the stress response. So once the amygdala fires, what that does then is that shuts down what we call the frontal part of our brain, or the higher cortex. Okay. And the higher cortex is the part of the brain that's responsible for decision making, reasoning, planning, problem solving, okay? So when the fight-flight response goes, these parts of our brain, the parts of our brain that help us to think in a rational way, shut down, okay? And this is why we might make poor decisions when we're highly anxious. This is why we might be irritable or angry when we're feeling anxious, okay? Because those reasoned parts of our brain aren't working effectively. And for those of you watching this who may struggle with anxiety yourselves, you will probably recognize what I'm talking about, the idea that it can be difficult to think clearly when you're in a highly anxious state. Okay, and that's because this part of the brain has essentially shut down, for want of a better phrase. Okay, so we are in fight-flight mode. If we can find ways to calm the amygdala, we will bring our frontal cortex back online. Okay, and this means that we can start to think in a more reasoned way. And we're going to talk about ways to do that in today's presentation. Okay. So I just want to talk you through the physical changes that happen in the body once the stress response goes off. So you see here that it begins in the brain, and the stress hormones, as I've said already, adrenaline and cortisol, are released through the adrenal glands. And this causes an increase in heart rate. We find that our blood pressure increases. So this is why people with anxiety will often report heart palpitations, will notice sweating, will notice dilation of the pupils. So our body is going into that fight-flight mode, ready to either attack or to run away. We will find that energy goes to the major muscle groups in our body. Okay, so the liver will convert what we call glycogen to glucose, and this prepares us to be able to either run away or fight. And this is really important, this next point, that what we call the long-term projects in the body will shut down when we are highly anxious. Okay, so when we're anxious, the digestive system shuts down. Okay, the reproductive systems in both men and women also decrease in performance, because essentially we don't need to be digesting our food if we are about to become somebody's food. Okay, and so it's really important we understand that long-term exposure to anxiety can have a detrimental impact on areas of our physical health. We often find when people come to the clinic and say they're struggling with anxiety, in fact, gut problems, bowel problems, irritable bowel syndrome, these kinds of things, this is as the result of a build-up over a long period of time of adrenaline and cortisol. So this is really important for us to bear in mind. Okay, so these are the physical changes. What are we going to see when somebody's anxious? Well, we're going to divide it up into these 4 categories. I'm going to talk firstly about the psychological symptoms of anxiety. So you might notice yourself or somebody else around you starts to think in what we call a catastrophic way. Okay, so it's going to be the worst case scenario being played out. This person is going to go to what is the absolute worst thing that could happen here. We call this catastrophic thinking. We might find that defense mechanisms kick in because anxiety is not a very pleasant thing to experience. All of us, including myself, have what we call defense mechanisms. And these are ways that our psyches, our minds, learn to try and control anxiety. Okay, so we may make a joke out of things. We may use humor. We may dissociate. We may numb from anxiety. So we may just completely ignore it, not give attention and time to it, really try and just running away from it. And some people who experience anxiety might intellectualize the anxiety. Okay, so they might start to really try and talk about why it's not a factor, why it's not a big deal, but they are still feeling and experiencing that anxiety, but they aren't necessarily in contact with it in an authentic way. And I'm going to talk later about what being in contact with anxiety looks like in an authentic way. Behaviorally, we'll see people becoming restless. Particularly in times of COVID, we may see things like excessive hand washing, cleaning absolutely every single item that comes into the house, spending a good deal of time washing, showering, changing clothes, these kinds of things. Not quite so relevant now, but in the early stages, we saw a lot of panic buying. So this was a behavioral response to anxiety. I am feeling a good deal of anxiety, uncertainty about what's to come. I'm going to go out and make sure I'm prepared. I'm going to stock up on loo roll, wasn't it? That was the big one. Okay. We may find that people hoard. I've just talked about that. And also, just people behaving very edgy ways, restless, fidgety, and often this is accompanied by irritability and anger. Okay. Now, anger and irritability, or anger and anxiety, I should say, go hand in hand. So when you see somebody who looks very angry, there is a good chance that there is some anxiety underlying that emotion, okay? Because anger is much easier to feel and to express than anxiety. Anxiety requires us to sit with it, to hold it, to do something with it. But anger, it can be discharged very quickly, often outwards, okay? So try and hold that in mind. Often what underlies anger is a sense of anxiety, okay? In terms of the emotional symptoms, we might find irritability. People feel sad, hopeless, helpless. They may feel overwhelmed, lots of unease and fear. So it's not just anxiety, the emotion that's present. Often it is accompanied by these other emotions. And we're going to talk later about something we call the granular naming of emotions. And this is where we're able to differentiate between what anxiety is, but what panic is, or what feeling unease is. We're going to talk about this later, okay? But the main point here is that anxiety is often found with a number of different emotions. And as I talked about slightly earlier, the cognitive changes we might see in somebody, memory problems, difficulty retaining information, an inability to concentrate or to focus, poor judgment, negative focus. And this is because, as I said earlier, the parts of the brain that control those cognitive abilities has essentially shut down when somebody is feeling anxious. Now, you may be looking at this list and thinking, okay, this describes somebody I know when they're anxious. This maybe describes me when I'm feeling anxious. Again, I want to go back to the idea that we all feel anxious at some time. So you will have all experienced I'm confident you will have all experienced these symptoms at some point in your life, and perhaps more so during times of COVID. This doesn't necessarily mean you have an anxiety disorder. I'm not going to cover today how we diagnose an anxiety disorder, but essentially what we're looking for is most of these symptoms present for at least a sort of 3-4 week period, and those symptoms are having a detrimental impact on day-to-day functioning, okay? But if you are concerned, having read these today, that you may be experiencing an anxiety disorder, I'd very much encourage you to reach out to us here at the Lighthouse, because we know that early intervention, so early treatment, getting to seek treatment soon, predicts how well somebody does in their recovery. So I really would urge you to do that if you suspect that you may have an anxiety disorder. I'm just noticing a question's come in. Okay, I'll get to that question at the end. Thank you. Right, let's move on. Just bear with me. Not quite sure where my next slide has gone. Here we go. Okay. So I talked earlier about the dog example, didn't I? That's the stimulus, okay? So when I perceive something anxiety provoking. Now, if we take it back to COVID, this could be watching the news and finding out that there's a new variant of the virus, or this could be watching the news, finding that your home country is now on the red list with the UAE, and so you're not going to be able to travel to see your family, okay? This is the stimulus. This is the thing that is presented to you that triggers that anxiety response to go, okay? So we have the stimulus over this side. At the other end, what we have is the response, okay? And the response is how you then respond to that situation. There is a psychiatrist by the name of Viktor Frankl, who was also incarcerated in Nazi concentration camps during the Second World War. He wrote a wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he talks about the freedom to choose. And I'm going to quote him, but forgive me if I don't quote him verbatim. But it's essentially what he says is, the only thing that we have in life is the ability to choose, okay? So I think he said something like, people can take away absolutely everything from you, but they cannot take away your ability to choose how you respond in any given situation. And I'm just going to let that quote just sink for a second, okay? So we have the ability to choose how we respond in any given situation. Now, when anxiety shows up, it can feel really difficult to choose, okay? It feels like our responses are automatic. It feels like we're pulled into reacting, but we don't want to be reacting. We want to be responding. Responding is where the stimulus is presented to us. We process that stimulation, okay? We do a number of things, which we're going to talk about in a minute, to try and get those frontal parts of our brain back online, and then we choose how to respond, okay? So again, for those of you watching this, it may be that a stimulus shows up and you automatically, you know, let's use the example of the new variant of COVID. Stimulus comes up, oh my gosh, new variant of COVID. What are we going to do? This is going to be awful. We're all going to be infected. We need to pull the kids out of school and homeschool them. We need to not go and see our friends at the weekend. Okay, this would be a reaction, okay? What we want to do is get to a place where you can see that news article, absorb the information, calm your fight-flight response, start thinking about it analytically, and then choose how to behaviorally respond after that, okay? As I've said, I won't labor the point, but reactive responses are emotion-based, often fear-based, feeling-driven, and relatively inconsistent. Proactive responses are often guided by our values, what's important to us. They're choice-driven, and they're often strategic and consistent. Okay. So let's think about confronting the coronavirus. We're doing well for time. This is good. Okay. So I'm going to introduce you now to the sort of practical aspects for how to respond rather than to react. Okay. Now, the first point I want to make is the idea of willingness and acceptance. So I talked earlier about how sometimes people are not willing to experience anxiety. They want it gone. They perceive that it's a negative thing in their lives. And so what they try and do is avoid that anxiety. They may numb it. through overeating, alcohol, cigarettes. They may distract themselves constantly. They may, do a whole range of things to not experience the anxiety. Guys, I need to tell you, the first step for dealing with anxiety is being willing to experience it. Okay, we talk about the idea of leaning into anxiety. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick, just going to give you a quick example of this in practice. Okay, so actually, let me use that example just before I came on. 5 minutes before, a few butterflies in my stomach because I knew I was presenting to a good number of people today, and I thought, okay, this is anxiety. Okay, it's okay that anxiety is here. It's trying to tell me something. It's trying to tell me that this is an important talk today, that I want to do well. So I'm going to be willing to experience the anxiety. I didn't start running around my office saying, no, I can't feel this. I can't feel this. Where's the, where's the caffeine? Where's the, to try and numb it. I was willing to experience it. And what we find is the moment we become accepting of the emotion, the intensity reduces. Okay, we're almost kind of surrendering to it. Now, this doesn't mean saying, okay, I'm going to be anxious for the rest of my life, but it just means saying, I am willing to tolerate this emotion. As human beings, we have a rich palette of human emotions, and this can include, joy, happiness, all the things we like to feel. But this also includes anger, irritation, frustration, betrayal, regret, anxiety, these more uncomfortable emotions, but these still exist within us, and we have to be willing to accept them. If we try and run away from them, ignore them, bury them, they start surfacing in other ways, okay? So we have to be willing to experience them, and anxiety is no different. As I've said, what you resist will persist. If you're ignoring your anxiety, distracting from it, it's going to start manifesting in different ways. We talked earlier about the potential for it to start manifesting in the gut. It's still there, okay? It's still there. You're just not paying attention to it. A lot of our energy goes into not wanting to feel something. It can be incredibly time consuming to be distracting ourselves, numbing ourselves, drinking, using substances, okay? And over the longer term, this just doesn't work. We talk about the 90-second rule. This is the idea that if I am able to notice that I am feeling anxious and sit with that, lean into it, make room for it for 90 seconds. So again, before I came on the talk today, okay, I notice I'm feeling anxious. Okay, I'm just going to sit here. I'm just going to breathe. I'm going to sit here. I'm going to breathe for 90 seconds. And that emotion is going to start to dissipate, okay? We find through some really good quality research, actually, that 90 seconds is generally the point at which that emotion will start to reduce in intensity. Okay? We talk about the idea of a soft front and a strong back. So at my soft front, I'm willing to experience this anxiety, okay? I'm willing to make room for it. But at my back, I'm resilient enough to be able to deal with it. Okay, so when it comes, I'm resilient to be able to process it. Again, thinking back to COVID-19, you're watching that news article, you find there's a new strain of the variant. Okay, I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious about this new strain of the of the virus. I'm going to make room for this feeling because I know that I can manage it. I know that I can cope with it. Okay? And I know that it will start to dissipate after 90 seconds. So willingness and acceptance, guys, really, really fundamental. It's really important also to know your triggers, okay, your individual triggers. So emotional contagion theory is something that we often talk about. I don't know if it has ever been that you've been out for a coffee or gone to see some friends, and you've got that friend or that family member that just seems to drain you, okay? They might be particularly negative, they might be particularly pessimistic, but they feel like they drain you, okay? This is emotional contagion theory. So the people that you surround yourself with will generally start to have an impact on your own mood, okay? You have in your brain what we call mirror neurons. Okay? Mirror neurons, essentially what they're designed to do is to keep us engaged with people, okay? Because again, evolutionary speaking, we need to be part of a group. And what these mirror neurons do is they start mimicking the behavior of others, okay? This is why if everybody, all 71 of us on this presentation today were put in a room together and I started using particular words or particular phrases, you would start to use those particular words or phrases, even if I hadn't told you to, because your mirror neurons are picking up on my behavior and trying to form a kind of in-group with me. So this is emotional contagion theory. The downside of this, of course, is that if you are spending time with people who are negative, pessimistic, highly anxious themselves, that may start to wear off in you. That may start to drain you. So we want you to be guarding your energy. Okay, I'm not telling you to, stop contact with all of your friends who may be anxious. But what I'm saying is you might want to put in some boundaries around that. Okay, so instead of seeing this person every other day, I'm going to see them once a week instead. Okay, so really trying to guard your energy. Observe, don't absorb. So if you are with somebody that does drain that energy from you, really try and get into that observer headspace. Watch it, okay? Observe it. A bit like earlier when I said willingness and acceptance to experience anxiety. Be willing to be present with this person and observe their anxiety, but try not to get caught up in the discussion. Try not to get caught up in the rumination about it. Observe it, okay, from a distance. Mindfulness is an exceptional way to be able to get us into this observer headspace. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about mindfulness in a moment or so. Energy flows where attention goes. So if we are with people a good deal of the time that are draining us, it's likely that our energy is going to be spent on that. So that just summarizes this slide. Observing your thoughts. I'm going to say something that can sometimes be controversial with clients, okay? But you are not your thoughts, okay? Your thoughts are something separate from you. Yes, they take place internally in your mind, but you are not your thoughts, okay? If I say to you now, I want you to imagine me riding a pink elephant. Bring an image to your mind of me riding a pink elephant, okay? You guys can see that image. Okay, there's a part of your brain that can see that image. Okay, so your thoughts are something separate to you. That thought of me riding a pink elephant is something separate to you. There is a part of your brain that can spot yourself having that thought. So we want you, when thoughts are coming up for you about the pandemic, so I'm really anxious, or there's this new variant of COVID, we want you to be creating some distance from that thought. So I want you to start getting into the habit of saying, I notice I am having the thought that, okay? So again, good example. Again, before I came on to do this presentation today, okay, I notice I've got butterflies in my stomach. Okay, I notice I'm having the thought that I may feel nervous about doing this talk today. Okay, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm anxious about this pandemic. I notice I am having the thought that. So what we're doing here is we are stepping back from our thoughts. Some of those thoughts may be true, but some of them may not be true. We're not really interested in whether they're true or not. We're interested in taking a step back and thinking, this is just a thought, okay? And this helps to create some distance. And some good examples here. I'm having the thought that, what if I get the virus? I'm having the thought that, what if I can't travel this summer? These are just thoughts. There may be some validity and some truth in some of those thoughts, but you want to be thinking about those issues. What if I can't travel this summer? You want to be thinking about that in a responsive way, not a reactive way, so that you can make your plans properly. You can do your diligence and think about the risks, but you're doing it in a calm state rather than a reactive and emotional state. Again, guys, mindfulness is the way that our brains quite literally change when we do mindfulness. When we do brain scans, we find that the frontal areas of the brain grow for people who are consistently and regularly engaging in mindfulness-based practices. And so I would strongly urge you to book onto a course, sign up for a workshop. We offer a range of mindfulness services here at the Lighthouse, but really try and get into this because it can be an excellent way to start creating some distance from our thoughts. I also want you to start getting into the habit of thinking about the things you can control and the things that you cannot control, okay? So things that you can control are things like your attitude, your own social distancing, limiting your social media contact, turning off the news, okay? If all of these anxiety-provoking stimuli are there in front of you, you can have control over how much you engage with that. Okay, so I would invite you maybe after today's talk to start thinking about some of the things that cause you anxiety and to start sort of divvying them up into these two categories. Which of these things I worry about can I control? And which of these things I worry about can I not control? I can't control the amount of toilet paper in the store. I can't control how long this pandemic is going to last. I can't reasonably control the behavior of other people in the public, okay? So we want to be investing our time and energy on the things we can control rather than the things we cannot. There's a wonderful concept that we have in psychology called radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is about the idea of just saying, there are things in this life that I cannot control, and I'm not going to spend my energy in trying to control them. Okay. So really trying to have in your own mind about the things you can and can't control is fundamental. How are we doing for time? We're doing well. If you're experiencing anxiety, COVID-related anxiety or otherwise, I want you to go back to the basics. Okay, when a client comes in to see me and is experiencing anxiety, the first thing we go back to is the basics. And I'm going to be going here to the middle category here, being kind to your body. I want you to be limiting caffeine. I want you to be doing 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week. I want you to be sleeping 7 to 8 hours. I want you to be eating nutritious food. Okay. We find that if we can get on, somebody who's experiencing an anxiety disorder, if we can get on top of their sleep, okay, their mood will spontaneously improve by anywhere between 10 and 20% just from getting the right amount of sleep. Okay. Listen, I'm a father of young children. I know what it's like. It's not always easy and straightforward. And all of us have things going on in our lives that may impact upon our sleep routines. But it is fundamental that we get on top of sleep and get into good sleep hygiene habits. Again, it makes common sense, doesn't it? Eating well, staying hydrated, exercising. Important for me to say that 30 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week, 5 times per week, is the equivalent to having an antidepressant for people experiencing mild depression. Okay, so exercise just as effective as mild, as an antidepressant medication for people experiencing mild depression. Okay, this is because of the release of endorphins into the body. This is because of the release of opiates, the body's natural painkillers. Even if you are not a big exerciser, you don't have to be going to the gym and running for half an hour. A walk a day, 30 minutes a day. Doing a home workout, doing a YouTube video workout at home, maybe with your children or your partner. Yoga, whatever it may be. All right. But these basics are fundamental. You may want to calm your mind through positive affirmations, just reminding yourself that this pandemic will pass. Nothing in life is forever. There are, everything rises, everything sustains, and everything does fall away. And this pandemic, whilst we don't know how long that's going to take, but, this too shall pass. And, just trying to remind ourselves that, most of us human beings are doing the best we can. We're doing the best we can given the resources we have available to us. We're just trying to remind ourselves of that. We talk about the idea of stilling yourself, and I talked already about taking a break from the news, so I don't need to labour that point. I want to go to the far category here in terms of soothing your soul. If you are a spiritual person, meditating, engaging in mindfulness, if you're part of a religious domination or otherwise, prayer, engaging in spiritual practices, really trying to soothe your soul, because anxiety, we often think it's up here and it's very conscious, but in terms of soothing, we also want you to becoming, get in touch with that more spiritual part of yourself. And if any of those strategies on the right are appropriate for you, then I'd urge you to engage with those. And we just find that engaging in creative and playful activities during times of stress is, it's really helpful. So if it is that, you're really overwhelmed by COVID-19 anxiety, really trying to just go out at the weekends and have some fun, or, staying home and having some fun, doing something fun with the kids. Just because we've got this cloud over us at the moment in terms of the pandemic doesn't mean that moment to moment you can't be engaging with emotions such as joy, happiness, ecstasy, etc. I want to talk about the naming of emotions, and I alluded to this earlier in the talk. We want you, when an emotion shows up, to treat it with compassion and curiosity. What is this emotion here to teach me? Why is this showing up? Is there something I need to start doing differently in terms of my behavior? So we're trying to get away from the idea that emotions are harmful and they need to be avoided. We want to be treating them compassionately. Okay, here's anger. Okay, I'm going to make room for this anger. It doesn't feel very nice, but I'm going to make room for it. Okay, here's a sense of guilt. What's this guilt here to teach me? So we're really trying to name emotions. What we find is when we use what we call granular naming of emotions, which I alluded to earlier, often people will tell me that they feel angry, and I say, tell me a bit more. What do you mean by angry? And actually, when we break it down, there's a big difference between feeling rage, irritability, frustration, anger, anguish. All of these are on the anger spectrum. But if we can start getting into the habit of naming on a more subtle level what it is that we're experiencing, we have found through some good quality research that this can help people to feel more in control of what they're experiencing. Okay, so I really urge you to start getting into this idea of, okay, how do I actually feel about the pandemic? I do feel anxious, but also I feel relieved that I get to spend a bit more time with my kids and don't have to be at the office. Actually, I feel more connected to my partner because we're spending time together, whatever it may be. So we can experience two emotions simultaneously. Okay, it doesn't just need to be an overwhelming sense of anxiety. There is room for this other stuff despite the pandemic. I talked about labeling the emotions. I talked about not feeding the story. And well, actually, I probably haven't. Let me expand on that a little bit more. So we want you to be getting into the habit of not calling yourself an anxious person. Okay, I am an anxious person and I am anxious about the pandemic. Actually, you're a person who experiences some anxiety some of the time, but you also have the capability to experience a range of other emotions. So try not to feed that anxiety narrative too much. I talked already about the 90-second rule. If you are experiencing a high level of anxiety, we want you to be grounding yourself, okay? So you might do something like mindful hand washing. So next time you go to the bathroom, really try and feel the water on your skin, really try and get caught up in that moment. Often we will carry out our day-to-day tasks on autopilot. I want you to, next time you are washing your hands, just really try and feel the water, feel the soap in between your hands, ground yourself in the present moment. What this enables you to do momentarily, at least, is to switch off from some of the anxiety that may be there. Ground yourself by taking a short walk. Sometimes people like to do this barefoot. Sometimes in the UAE on the concreted roads, maybe not quite so appropriate, especially this time of year. But taking a short walk, really trying to be in touch with nature, using your five senses to take in. I can feel the sun on my skin. I can feel the wind through my hair. I can feel every single step I'm taking on the ground. We're really trying to ground ourselves and pull us away from what's happening inside our minds. This isn't distraction, okay? This is refocusing our attention on something that's happening right now in front of us, okay? Distraction is something very different that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Aromatherapy, again, this just helps to engage our five senses. You might want to use foot baths, whatever strategies just ground you back in the present moment and you're using your five senses. If it is that you experience panic attacks, and panic attacks are the extreme form of anxiety where the body's amygdala is firing off so much cortisol and adrenaline that we start to go into overdrive. For many people that experience panic attacks, it can feel like they are having a heart attack, and indeed the symptoms are somewhat similar. Okay. Panic attacks can be incredibly scary, and the lifetime prevalence of people experiencing a panic attack is about 1 in 4. So 1 in 4 of us will experience a panic attack at some point in our lifetime. Obviously, the intensity of those panic attacks varies from person to person. But you need to know the signs for a panic attack, okay? So if somebody is palpitating uncontrollably, sweating uncontrollably, they seem disorientated, they say, I think I may be having a heart attack, you're going to be calling for emergency support just in case it is a heart attack, but also you really need to be able to recognize these signs. And if you yourself are experiencing a panic attack, you will want to do some comforting self-talk. Okay, I'm experiencing a panic attack. I know this is not dangerous. I know I can't die from it. I'm safe. This will pass. Okay, so riding riding the wave, leaning into the panic attack, making room for it, even though it is a deeply unpleasant experience. The more we try not to experience the panic attack, the stronger it will get. Okay, so we just need to be ready to accept that this is happening for the time being and move on. Okay, we talk about the idea of 4-7-8 breathing. This is the most effective way for us to start turning down that amygdala fight-flight response. Breathing in for the count of 4, holding our breath for the count of 7, and exhaling for the count of 8. I want you to get into the habit of doing this for 5 to 10 minutes a day. The great thing with this is you can be doing it anywhere. All right, you can download apps that will talk you through guided deep breathing exercises. But we know that when people are starting to feel anxious, doing 5 to 10 minutes of guided deep breathing will turn down that amygdala response and help you to start responding rather than reacting to what's in front of you. Okay. And when all else does fail, guys, we say distract, okay? We want to avoid distraction because, as I talked about already, if we're distracting on a long-term basis, this means that we're not paying attention, we're not being present with our emotions, we're not willing to feel them. But if the anxiety is unbelievably overwhelming and we just need to distract away from it, you might want to be engaging with something on your phone, whether it's a game. You might want to change your physical environment, or you might want to shift the activity or task you're doing. Distraction, use it sparingly and in worst case scenarios, but please rely on everything that I've talked about so far in today's presentation in the first instance. Okay. So guys, I appreciate that I've whistled through that a little bit, but I wanted to allow some time and space for questions. Please do pop your questions in the questions box here. I won't read out people's names because people are from a variety of companies here today, so I won't be reading out people's names. So please do know that your questions will be responded to anonymously. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the questions that have come in already. Okay, just give me a moment to read this. Okay. So, somebody here has just commented in relation to sleep and just said that, during the pandemic, sleeping has been very, very difficult. And then, this person is then struggling to get up in the morning. And, let me just really empathize with you. I think it can be incredibly difficult to feel motivated to get up in the morning if you're not sleeping well. And as I say, often for people who are having difficulty with sleep, we start thinking about, okay, what can you be doing proactively to help with your sleep? So throughout the day, are you exercising? Are you eating well? Are you limiting caffeine? Do you have a good nighttime routine? So, at 9 p.m, not eating anything after, 7:30, 8 p.m, whatever it may be. I know it's Ramadan at the moment, so it's a little bit different for many people, but, I'm going to start my evening routine at 9 p.m. I'm going to go and have my bath. I'm going to have a chamomile tea after. I'm going to avoid technology. So this nighttime routine to the point of going to bed, really important. And then when you are going to sleep, maybe trying a nighttime meditation, doing some of those breathing exercises I talked about before going to sleep. So we want you to be thinking about proactively what you can be doing for your sleep routine, but also, the moment your head hits the pillow, what do you then do? We've got a range of resources available at the Lighthouse in terms of sleep. My colleague, Dr. Saliha Afridi, many of you will be familiar with her. She has an Instagram account and she's done lots of videos on sleep. So I'd strongly recommend you to go and check those out as a way to help. Okay, let me just take another question here. Okay, yeah, somebody here has just commented in relation to the point I made earlier about observe and don't absorb. And the person has asked, is it possible that what I think of others is a reflection of myself? Yeah, listen, this is a really good question. Something I've not covered today because we're thinking about anxiety here, but yeah, we do sometimes have this idea that the qualities or attributes that we find annoying or repulsive or icky picky in other people may actually be qualities that also exist deep inside of us. We refer to this as the psychological shadow. I'm not going to go into it in any great detail today, just in the interest of time and also the nature of this talk. But again, please see my colleague, Dr. Saliha Afridi's Instagram page, where she talks about the shadow in great detail. So I hope that that's helpful for you. Just let me take another question here. So somebody's asked here about how is an anxiety disorder diagnosed? And this is a really good question, okay? And I sort of briefly alluded to it earlier, but essentially with anxiety disorders, we're looking for a cluster of symptoms, okay? And usually there are sort of 9 or 10 key symptoms that we're looking for, which include restlessness, overthinking, an inability to control worry, feeling on edge, impact upon sleep, these sorts of core symptoms. Most of us will experience those things from time to time, but we're looking for consistency in all of those symptoms to a point where it is starting to impact on the person's day-to-day functioning. So it starts stopping them going to work, it's stopping them socializing in whatever way that is at the moment, given the pandemic. And we're looking for the duration of how long those symptoms have been present. And usually we're thinking a minimum of sort of 2 to 3 weeks, but usually longer. Please don't self-diagnose yourself with an anxiety disorder. Okay, you will find a range of websites out there that will tell you that they will sort of diagnose you. Just take this free test. You know, you can look at the symptoms of anxiety and you might start to think to yourself, do I have an anxiety disorder? But the only way to know for sure is to come and visit a professional, okay, who will make that diagnosis. If you are going to do that, you want to be going to a reputable clinic and you want to be meeting with a psychologist or a psychiatrist to make that diagnosis, okay? So I hope that's helpful. Let me respond to a few more questions on here. So somebody here has asked, how do we start changing bad habits? Everyone saying to start first, but how do we really start? Yeah, listen, really good question. You know, I've talked a lot about, you know, a lot of things today, good habits to start getting into, exercise, monitoring your sleep, etc. I noticed in your question there was a bit of a thing about people say just start, but how do we actually get to that point of starting? And what I need to say, I think, is, you know, I really, in my sort of 15 years of doing this and trying to evoke behavior change in people, a couple of points. Number one, start small. Okay, so, you know, if it is that you want to run an Ironman, you know, don't set that as a goal for a couple of months' time. You know, start it as going for a 5-minute walk. When that's successful, then start doing a 10-minute walk, then do a 15-minute walk. One thing that I often say to my clients, okay, is if you are waiting for the motivation to show up, you're going to be waiting for a very long time, okay? Motivation comes after we begin the activity, okay? So if I have an exercise for a year and I literally have to drag myself or, you know, get my partner to drag me to the treadmill, I do my 5-10-minute walk, I get off and I think, that felt good. There's the motivation, okay? That's the motivation. So the motivation we generally find comes after the activity. Some people will say, actually, you know, one day they wake up and the motivation's just there. But in my sort of professional opinion and experience, these people are relatively rare. So we want you to be doing the activity and the motivation will follow. But you really need to be setting very small, minute goals initially, okay, rather than you know, something big, because if you do something big and you fail, that further decreases the motivation. So I hope that's helpful. I feel like this is a plug for Dr. Saliha's account, and this isn't the idea, but she recently did a video on behavioural change and making habits stick, I think it was called. So please see her account for that. Okay. A couple more questions. So I talked here about the symptoms of anxiety and how to notice it already. And I just talked about how we diagnose an anxiety disorder. So I think, I hope that that's answered that question. How are we doing for time? So we've got about 5 minutes or so left. Thank you for all of your questions, by the way, guys. I'm just going to come down here. What do I do if my partner is struggling with anxiety? So if you suspect that a partner or a loved one is struggling with anxiety, this is a really good question. You'd be surprised how many people come to the clinic saying, actually, it's my partner, I think, that needs some professional support, but they're unwilling to access. And, thinking about the things that we've covered today, you can, and again, I'm going to use this sort of metaphor now, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. Okay, and this is really important for us to understand. We love our partners, we want to be there for them, we can see that they are struggling. So we can make information available to them. So, you can hand them the LightHouse Arabia's Instagram page, you can hand them the contact details for the GP. You can give them resources or buy them books on managing anxiety. You can book an appointment for them to access professional support, but ultimately, if the person is not ready and is not willing, it's unlikely that you are going to make some progress for that or with that. But what I would say is allow the environment to be ready for when that person is ready to change. And by that I mean, just saying to the person, I am here for you when you want to go and get some help. I will come with you to the appointment when you're ready. I respect that you're not ready to deal with this at the moment, but please know that I am here for you. If and when you do want to deal with this. So really just trying to sit tight, sit patient, and allow space and time for that person to be ready. I know how frustrating it can be when somebody very close to us is struggling, and we want to sort of kick them, we want to get them into action, but ultimately this person is, I'll assume, an adult with capacity and has the right, the legal right, I might add, to make the decision for themselves as to whether they access support. And it's important for me to say as well, one of the best predictors of success in psychological therapy is how motivated somebody is to change. And so if people are brought here kind of kicking and screaming and not wanting to be here, we generally find they're not terribly well engaged in the process. Although, we do our best to try and, allow the process to kind of grow on them over time. But thank you for that question. That's very helpful. Okay, probably just got time for one more question here. So it's more of a statement, I suppose. So I lost my relatives and friends during the pandemic, which has disturbed me a lot. I'm frustrated as also my neighbours have been misbehaving and feel treated very badly. Yeah, listen, I'm incredibly grateful to you for sharing this, and let me share my condolences with regards to the friends and family that you may have lost during this process. I go back to what I said earlier, we here at the LightHouse offer a range of free of charge grief resources. Okay, this includes support groups, one-off grief consultations with a psychologist or therapist. So, if the grief is weighing heavy on you, I would strongly encourage you to reach out to us to book an appointment of that nature. And you can see our website for details of that. Grieving is an incredibly unique journey and process for everybody, and there is no one way to grieve. There's no right or wrong way of going about it. And of course, people during times of COVID are grieving the loss of loved ones, as is the case with this person here. But also, many of us are grieving something from the COVID pandemic in some way, whether it's the loss of a job, the loss of being able to go home to be with loved ones, the loss of social contact. So what unites all of us in this pandemic is some form of loss. And this is important to think about as well, I think. So thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that, and I wish you all the best. Okay. Guys, we're going to finish up in a couple of minutes. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. Let me just share a couple more slides with you. I feel like I probably don't need to do this because I've already talked about it, but many of you I'm sure already will follow us on Instagram. We're also on Facebook, and YouTube, etc. Lots of content, free content available on those channels, so please do see our accounts. Dr. Saliha Afridi, our managing director as well, her account is there for you. If you've enjoyed today's talk and found anything helpful, please feel free to post a Google review for us. That's always much welcome. If you haven't enjoyed today's talk, then please forget I just said that. Okay, so that's us. If you do need any further support and need to reach out to us, here are our details here. You can easily find us by Googling. So I'm just going to stop sharing now, and just a final goodbye to all of you then. So again, thank you so much for being here today. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I wish you a pleasant day ahead. Take care.